The repair shop sat in the lower ring of Threshold Station, wedged between a cargo bay that never stopped humming and a water reclamation facility that smelled like rust and chemicals. The sign above the door had seen better days. Baker's Repairs was written in 3 languages, though the Velascan script had faded so badly you could barely read it anymore. Nobody seemed to care enough to fix it, and honestly Daniel liked it that way. The less attention the better. Inside, the shop was cramped but organized. Shelves lined every wall, packed with spare parts, tools, and half-finished projects. A single workbench dominated the center of the room, illuminated by a bright overhead lamp that buzzed slightly. Daniel Baker stood at that bench now, wiping black grease from his calloused hands with an old rag. His eyes focused on the small broken robot in front of him. The door chime rang. A young Velascan child stepped inside, barely reaching Daniel's waist. She cradled something against her chest, her large eyes glistening with tears. Behind her, a taller Velascan adult hovered nervously near the entrance. The violet scales on their skin caught the light as they shifted uncomfortably. "Please, sir," the child said, her voice trembling as she carefully placed the broken robot on the counter. Nobody else could fix Chirp. Daniel leaned forward, studying the toy without touching it yet. It was a miniature combat drone replica, the kind that rich alien kids got as presents. Expensive piece of work even as a toy. But this one had seen better days. The wings were bent at wrong angles. The power core sat dark and lifeless in its chest cavity. Scorch marks scarred one side like someone had tried to force it open. He reached out and turned it over gently. His fingers traced the mechanisms underneath with the kind of familiarity that didn't come from hobby tinkering. These weren't hobby movements. They were automatic, practiced, the muscle memory of someone who had worked on the real versions of these machines. Someone who had fixed them in the dark, under fire, when seconds meant the difference between life and death. "I can fix him," Daniel said simply, setting the toy down. "Come back tomorrow morning." The child's parents stepped forward, placing a small credit chip on the counter. Their voice carried a mixture of hope and doubt. The others said it was impossible. "The parts are too old, too rare. They said we would need to buy a new one, but we cannot afford." "I said I can fix him." Daniel's voice stayed gentle but carried a firmness that stopped the explanation cold. "Tomorrow morning. Come back then." The parent hesitated, then nodded. The child looked up at Daniel with those big watery eyes. "You promise? You promise Chirp will fly again?" Daniel felt something twist in his chest. He knelt down to the child's level. "I promise. He'll fly better than before." After they left, the shop fell silent except for the distant hum of the station's life support systems. Daniel locked the door and flipped the sign to closed. Then he returned to his workbench and really looked at the robot. For a child's toy, it was remarkably sophisticated. The servo joints used the same principles as military-grade equipment. The gyroscopes were miniaturized versions of real stabilization systems. Even the power core, though tiny, operated on fusion principles that most civilians didn't understand. Daniel pulled his toolkit closer and began working. His hands moved with precision that seemed excessive for something so small and insignificant. But Daniel couldn't work any other way. He didn't just repair the bent wings. He carefully straightened each strut, then reinforced the joints so they wouldn't bend again. He didn't just replace the dead power core. He installed a better one, more efficient, longer lasting. The damaged gyroscopes got completely rebuilt. The scorch marks got cleaned away. Hours passed. The station cycled through its artificial night. The lights in the corridor outside dimmed. Most shops closed. But Daniel kept working under his bright lamp, lost in the familiar rhythm of disassembly, diagnosis, repair, and reconstruction. By midnight, he finished the final calibration. The little robot's eyes flickered on, glowing soft blue. It chirped once, testing its vocal processor. Then its wings extended and began to flutter. Slowly at first, then faster, until it lifted off the workbench and hovered there, perfectly stable. Daniel caught it gently and set it back down. The robot chirped again, happily this time, like it was thanking him. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he pulled down his sleeves, making sure the fabric covered the faded tattoo on his forearm. Just another repair job. Just another day in the shop. Nothing special. He placed the robot carefully in a protective case and set it aside for tomorrow's pickup. As he cleaned his tools and organized his workspace, Daniel tried very hard not to think about why his hands still remembered how to fix combat drones in the dark. Tried not to remember the sound they made when their power cores died mid-flight. Tried not to remember the faces of the pilots who depended on him to keep them running. He locked up the shop and headed to his small quarters in the station's residential ring. Tomorrow the child would come back. Tomorrow he would see her smile when her toy worked again. Tomorrow would be a good day. Tomorrow he wouldn't think about the past at all. He told himself that lie every single night. Admiral Raxine's ship docked at Threshold Station with all the ceremony befitting a Coalition war hero. The docking bay had been cleared and cleaned for the occasion. Station personnel stood at attention in their dress uniforms. Banners displaying the Coalition symbol hung from the walls, freshly printed and still smelling of ink. The airlock hissed open and Admiral Raxine stepped through. She stood nearly 8 feet tall, a towering Kryn officer whose presence filled the space around her. Her chitinous armor gleamed under the harsh dock lights, polished to perfection by her crew. 4 arms crossed in formal greeting as the station commander rushed forward, his face flushed with nervous energy. Her multiple eyes moved independently, taking in every detail of the reception. The positioning of the guards. The quality of the maintenance. The expressions on the faces of those assembled to greet her. Nothing escaped her notice. That was how she had survived 3 wars and risen to Admiral. "Welcome to Threshold Station, Admiral," the commander said, his voice cracking slightly. "We're honored to host you." Raxine's mandibles clicked in acknowledgement. "The inspection will take 3 days," she announced, her voice carrying across the bay without needing amplification. "I want to see how humans integrate with Coalition civilians, not just military personnel." Her aide, a younger Kryn officer named Vex, nodded nervously beside her. He clutched a datapad like it was a lifeline. Everyone in the diplomatic corps knew what this inspection really meant. 15 years had passed since humanity joined the Coalition after the border conflicts ended. 15 years of uneasy peace. But there were still voices in the Coalition Senate calling for restrictions on human expansion. Too aggressive, they said. Too unpredictable. Too willing to fight when diplomacy should prevail. This inspection would determine whether humans continued to integrate freely or faced new limitations on their movements and settlements. Raxine dismissed the formal reception after the minimum required pleasantries. She had no interest in staged demonstrations and prepared speeches. She wanted to see the real station, the daily life that unfolded when nobody thought they were being evaluated. She walked the station corridors with purpose, her security detail trailing behind at a respectful distance. Vex scurried along beside her, making notes on his datapad about everything they saw. The market surprised her. Humans stood behind stalls selling goods alongside Velascan merchants and Throsh traders. They haggled over prices, shared meals, complained about shipping costs together. A human woman helped a Velascan elder carry heavy containers. A Throsh mechanic taught a young human apprentice how to calibrate a sensor array. The interactions looked natural, unforced. In a public plaza, children played together. Human kids chased alien kids in some kind of tag game. Their laughter echoed off the metal walls, universal in its joy. A human father held his daughter on his shoulders so she could see over the crowd, standing next to a Velascan parent doing the same with their child. It was functional. Peaceful even. More than Raxine had expected. "Note that the integration appears successful at the civilian level," she told Vex. "No obvious tensions." "Yes, Admiral," he replied, typing rapidly. They continued their tour through the residential rings, the entertainment districts, the commercial zones. Everywhere the same pattern repeated. Humans and aliens coexisting, working together, living side by side. Perhaps the Senate's fears were unfounded. Perhaps humanity had truly adapted to Coalition life. Then she passed a small repair shop. It sat wedged between larger establishments, easy to miss. The sign was faded. Baker's Repairs in 3 languages. Through the grimy window, Raxine glimpsed movement inside. A young Velascan child stood at the counter, bouncing on her feet with excitement. A human man knelt beside her, holding a small robot. As Raxine watched, he activated it. The toy's wings fluttered to life, chirping happily. The child squealed with delight, a high-pitched sound of pure joy that made several passers-by smile. The child grabbed the robot, hugging it to her chest. Then she impulsively wrapped her arms around the human man's leg, squeezing tight. The human smiled. Not the polite smile Raxine had seen from other humans during formal interactions. This was different. Soft, tired, real. He patted the child's head gently, carefully, like she was precious and fragile. It was such a simple moment. Such an ordinary act of kindness. The kind of interaction that happened thousands of times a day across the galaxy. But then the human reached for a rag to wipe his hands. His sleeve pulled back as he moved. Raxine stopped breathing. There, on his forearm, rendered in faded ink that had seen years of wear, a falcon with lightning bolts clutched in its talons. Wings spread in attack formation. The edges were blurred, but the image was unmistakable. She knew that symbol. Every officer in the coalition knew that symbol. Falcon Unit. Caldwell's Ghosts. The unit that held the breach at Kandara. The unit that fought 40,000 Kryn warriors with only 300 soldiers. The unit that died to the last man buying time for civilian evacuation ships. Except they hadn't all died. Raxine's 4 hands clenched into fists. Her security detail sensed the change in her posture immediately, tensing and reaching for weapons. Vex looked up from his datapad, confused. Admiral? Is something wrong? But Raxine wasn't listening. She was staring at the human in the shop. At the faded tattoo. At the man who fixed children's toys with the same hands that had once kept military hardware running through 72 hours of hell. One of Caldwell's survivors. Here. On a forgotten station in a forgotten corner of space, living quietly among the very species he had once fought. Admiral? Vex pressed. Raxine made a decision. She changed direction suddenly, heading straight for the repair shop. Her security detail scrambled to follow, hands on weapons, scanning for threats. Everyone stay outside, Raxine commanded. I'm going in alone. Admiral, protocol requires. I said stay outside. She pushed open the door. A chime rang softly. The human looked up from the counter, his expression shifting from gentle to guarded in an instant. Old instincts, soldier instincts, their eyes met. And Raxine knew, with absolute certainty, that everything she thought she understood about humanity was about to change. Daniel looked up as the massive Kryn officer ducked through his doorway. The frame barely accommodated her height. Her security team filed in behind her, filling his small shop with armored bodies and the smell of weapons-grade lubricant. His expression didn't change, stayed neutral and calm, but his posture shifted. It was subtle, automatic, the kind of thing most people wouldn't notice. But soldiers would. His weight redistributed. His center of gravity lowered slightly. His hands moved away from his tools to open space. Old instincts, the kind that never really died no matter how many years passed. We're closed for, Daniel started. Everyone out, Raxine commanded. Her voice cut through his words like a blade. Her security team hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. Their training said never leave the Admiral alone with an unknown contact. Now. They retreated. The door hissed shut behind them, leaving Daniel alone with the towering alien officer who had once tried to kill him and everyone he'd ever cared about. The silence stretched between them, heavy and dangerous. Raxine approached slowly, deliberately. Her 4 arms hung loose at her sides, non-threatening, but Daniel knew how fast they could move. Her multiple eyes fixed on his forearm, staring at the spot where his sleeve had pulled back earlier. Where the tattoo showed. Falcon Unit, she said quietly, almost reverently. The way you'd speak in a graveyard. You're one of them. One of Caldwell's ghosts. Daniel's jaw tightened. His mind raced through options. Deny it? What? Say it was a fake tattoo, a tribute to heroes he'd never met. But something in her voice told him she already knew. You're mistaken, he said anyway. I was at Kandara. Raxine's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Her mandibles clicked softly, a nervous Kryn habit. I was a lieutenant then, leading the 7th Wave Assault. Do you know what that means? I was there on the ground, leading troops through the breach. I watched 300 humans hold that position for 72 hours against my people. Against 40,000 Kryn warriors. Daniel said nothing. His hands gripped the edge of his workbench. Knuckles white. The galaxy said it was impossible, Raxine continued, taking another step closer. We had overwhelming numbers. Superior position. Orbital support. Our generals promised us the breach would fall in 6 hours. Maximum. We had every advantage except one. What was that? Daniel heard himself ask. We were fighting humans who decided not to move. Raxine's eyes never left his face. You held. And held. And held. Our troops broke against your lines like water against stone. Every hour we thought you'd collapse. Every hour you proved us wrong. The defensive guns kept firing even when they should have melted. The armor stayed sealed even when the reactors were leaking. Your wounded kept fighting. Your dying kept shooting. It wasn't human. It was beyond human. She gestured to his tattoo, the faded falcon barely visible under his sleeve. Everyone wearing that mark died at Kandara. The coalition honored them posthumously. All 300 names read aloud in the Senate chamber. Monuments built on 6 worlds. Children learn about Falcon Unit in schools across the galaxy. They died heroes. Every single one. Except. The word hung in the air between them. Some of us made it out, Daniel said flatly. His voice was dead, emotionless. 20 of us. The wounded. Commander Caldwell's final order. The commander ordered you to survive. The commander ordered us to leave them behind. Daniel's voice cracked slightly despite his best efforts. There's a difference, Admiral. A big difference. He put the 20 most wounded soldiers in the last escape pod. Told us we'd done enough. That we deserved to live. Then he sealed the door manually from the outside so we couldn't argue. So we couldn't refuse. So we couldn't do what we wanted to do, which was stay and die with our brothers and sisters. Raxine studied him carefully. This human fixing children's toys in a forgotten corner of a backwater station. Hands that could keep military hardware running through impossible conditions. Hands that had probably repaired the same guns that killed thousands of her people. Hands that now gently fixed a child's robot with the same care and precision. She remembered those 72 hours more clearly than she wanted to. Remembered how Falcon unit's defensive guns kept firing long after every tactical simulation said they should have failed. Remembered how their armor stayed sealed despite catastrophic reactor leaks that should have killed everyone inside. Remembered how their commander had jury-rigged an overload sequence in the final hours that vaporized 3,000 Kryn warriors in one massive explosion. Engineers. Falcon unit's engineers had been the key to everything. While the infantry fought, the engineers kept them fighting. Kept the weapons working. Kept the armor sealed. Kept the impossible possible. The coalition needs you, Raxine said. Needs people who understand what you understood. People who can do what you did. Daniel looked at the small toy robot on his counter, still chirping softly. Its wings fluttered in the recycled air of the shop. Happy. Fix. Oh. I fix toys now, Admiral. That's all I'm good for. That's all I want to be good for. No, Raxine said firmly. Her voice carried absolute certainty. You're good for much more than that. And deep down, Daniel Baker, you know it? You know it every time your hands move with precision that goes beyond hobby repair. Every time you rebuild something to military specifications when civilian grade would work fine. Every time you look at a broken machine and see not what it is, but what it could be if someone just cared enough to fix it properly. Daniel looked away. What do you want from me? I want to offer you a choice, Raxine said. A real choice this time. Not an order. Not someone sealing a door and deciding your fate for you. What kind of choice? The kind that might save lives, Raxine replied. Or at least teach the next generation how to save their own. Daniel poured 2 cups of station-grade coffee from the small dispenser in the corner of his shop. Terrible stuff, honestly. Tasted like burned metal and old regrets. But it was universal. Every species in the coalition had learned to tolerate it, even if none of them actually enjoyed it. He handed 1 cup to Raxine, who accepted it with her upper right hand. Her mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement at the bitter smell. You want to know why I'm here? Daniel asked, settling into his worn repair chair. The cushion had long ago molded to his shape. Why I'm in a repair shop instead of teaching at some coalition academy? Yes, Raxine said simply. She remained standing, too large for any of his furniture. Daniel sat heavily, feeling every one of his years. I was a combat engineer. That was my specialty, my job, my entire purpose in Falcon unit. My job was to keep everything working. Weapons, armor, life support, communications, you name it. If it could break, I could fix it. If it couldn't break, I could improve it. He sipped the awful coffee and grimaced. At Kendara, that meant I worked 90 hours straight with no sleep. You don't sleep when your friends are dying if you stop working. I repaired breach suits while wearing one, feeling the radiation leak through the tears I was trying to patch. I hot-patched plasma burns in cannon barrels between firing cycles, my hands getting scorched every time. I replaced power couplings in the dark because we couldn't spare the energy for lights. I recalibrated targeting systems using nothing but sound because the displays were shattered. His hands trembled slightly. He set the cup down. The second day was bad. The third day was worse. But we held. We kept holding. And then the reactor started failing. Raxine's multiple eyes focused intently on him. Third day, about hour 68 if I remember right, the main reactor started failing. We were down to 18% power. The defensive guns were running on emergency reserves. The armor was recycling its own heat to keep the power cells active. We couldn't last much longer. He paused, swallowing hard. Commander Caldwell called me to the command center. Asked me a question. Just one simple question. He asked if I could overload the reactor. Turn it into a bomb. Big enough to collapse the breach entirely. Big enough that nothing would get through. Not ever. And you did, Raxine said quietly. I did. Daniel's voice went flat, mechanical. I rigged a chain reaction that would turn our entire position into a crater. Vaporize everything within 2 kilometers. Turn rock into glass. I set it on a timer. 30 minutes. Enough time to evacuate if we had anywhere to evacuate to. But we didn't. There was only one escape pod left and it could barely hold 20 people. His voice went hollow, empty. Caldwell ordered the 20 most wounded into the pod. I tried to argue. I had shrapnel in my leg, sure, but I could still work. My hands were burned, but they were functional. I could keep fixing things. Keep helping. But he wouldn't hear it. He looked at me and said, "That's an order, Baker. Get in the damn pod." And when I still didn't move, he physically picked me up and threw me inside. Then he sealed the door manually from the outside so we couldn't override it. So we couldn't refuse. So we couldn't choose to stay. Raxine waited, silent. She understood the weight of what came next. We launched. The pod barely had fuel. Barely had life support. We crammed in there, all of us bleeding and broken, watching through the small viewport as Kandara got smaller below us. 23 minutes after launch, the reactor went critical. I watched through the pod window as the breach, as everything. He stopped. Couldn't continue for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. The explosion was so bright I thought it would burn through the viewport glass. So hot we could feel it even in space. It was beautiful in the worst possible way. Like watching a star being born. And I knew right then what was happening. 280 humans died in that explosion. My friends, my unit, my family. And I built the bomb that killed them. My hands, my design, my calculations. You saved millions of civilians, Raxine said. Her voice carried no judgment, only fact. The evacuation ships got away because Falcon unit held that line. Because you held that line. I know the math, Admiral. Daniel's laugh was bitter. Believe me, I know the math. 280 deaths versus millions of lives saved. It's simple arithmetic. Any command academy would call it a successful mission. A heroic sacrifice. The right tactical choice. He looked up at her. Doesn't make it easier. Doesn't stop me from seeing their faces every night. Doesn't stop me from wondering if there was another way. Some solution I missed because I was too tired, too scared, too human. They sat in silence. The coffee grew cold. The station hummed around them. Life continued, indifferent to old pain. Finally, Raxine spoke. The coalition faces new threats. Different than before, but equally dangerous. We need engineers who can think like Falcon unit thought. Creatively, desperately, effectively. People who can solve impossible problems with inadequate resources. Not to fight. To teach. To pass on what you learned so others don't have to learn it the hard way. Daniel looked at his tattoo, the faded falcon barely visible on his scarred forearm. I don't think I can go back to that world, Admiral. I left it behind for a reason. I'm not asking you to go back, Raxine said firmly. I'm asking you to move forward. To make sure the next generation doesn't have to make the choices you made. To teach them to save lives, not just how to fight. To turn your worst day into their lesson plan so maybe, just maybe, they get to have better days than you did. Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, "What exactly are you offering?" Daniel found the Velasquez family at their hab unit 2 days later. The residential section of Threshold Station was cramped, with narrow corridors and doors that opened into tiny living spaces. He knocked on the door marked with their family designation. The door slid open and the child, whose name was Lyra, squealed when she saw him standing there. "Mr. Baker. Look. She held up the robot, making it do loops in the air. "Chirp can fly so good now. Better than all the other toys." Her father appeared behind her, his violet scales catching the corridor lights. Concern immediately crossed his features. "Mr. Baker. Is something wrong with the repair?" "No. Actually, yes." Daniel held out the credit chip they had given him. "I can't accept payment. I made a mistake. I made it too sophisticated. It's basically a real drone now, just smaller. That's not appropriate for a child's toy. But Lyra loves it." The father looked genuinely confused. Daniel knew he did. He could see the joy on Lyra's face as she made Chirp perform aerial maneuvers that would impress military pilots. That was exactly the problem. "I know she does. So let me fix it properly this time." He knelt down to Lyra's level, meeting her eyes. "Lyra, can I borrow Chirp for one more day? Just one day. I promise I'll make him even better for you specifically. Not better for flying or fighting. Better for you." Lyra hugged the robot protectively against her chest. Her large eyes studied Daniel's face, trying to decide if she could trust him. Then, slowly, reluctantly, she handed Chirp over. "You promise you'll bring him back?" "I promise," Daniel said. "Tomorrow morning." Daniel returned to his shop and spread his tools across the workbench one more time. He looked at the robot, at all the sophisticated modifications he had made. The military-grade servos. The advanced stabilization. The combat-ready power core. None of it belonged in a child's toy. He had built it the way his hands remembered, not the way it should be. So he rebuilt it again. This time he kept it simpler. Safer. More appropriate for a child who just wanted her toy to fly around her room and make her laugh. He softened the wings so they couldn't hurt anyone. He limited the flight ceiling so it couldn't escape into dangerous areas. He added safety protocols that would bring it back to Lyra automatically if it flew too far. He made it chirp different sounds based on her voice commands. He gave it personality instead of performance. When he returned it the next morning, it was perfect for what it should be. A child's toy. Nothing more, nothing less. Lyra's father accepted the robot, turning it over in his hands. "Why do this?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. "The extra work, no payment, coming back twice. Most people would have just taken the money and moved on." Daniel watched Lyra immediately start playing with Chirp, laughing as it responded to her voice with happy chirps. "Because the little things matter," he said quietly. "Especially the little things. Maybe especially only the little things." The father studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Baker. Truly." Admiral Raxine was preparing to depart when Daniel arrived at her ship. The docking bay bustled with activity as her crew loaded supplies and ran final system checks. She stood near the boarding ramp, reviewing reports on her data pad. She looked up as Daniel approached, and something in her expression told him she had been expecting this. "I'll help," he said without preamble. "No greeting, no small talk. But I have conditions." Raxine's multiple eyes gleamed with what might have been satisfaction. "Name them." "You don't put me in a military facility. You establish engineering schools on stations like this one. Places where refugees live, where civilian kids grow up, where normal people are just trying to survive. You teach everyone, not just soldiers. Not just the elite. Everyone who wants to learn." "Agreed," Raxine said immediately. "And this isn't about making better weapons," Daniel continued, his voice firm. "It's about teaching people to fix what's broken, to build what's needed, to protect what matters. It's about making things that help people live, not helping people die." "That's what Falcon Unit did at Kandara," Raxine said. "No," Daniel corrected sharply. "That's what Falcon Unit died failing to do at Kandara. We held a line. We killed thousands. We destroyed everything around us. We succeeded tactically and failed morally. This time we do it right. This time we build instead of destroy." Raxine considered this, then nodded. "Agreed. On all conditions." Daniel returned to his shop one last time. He packed his tools slowly, methodically, wrapping each one in cloth before placing it in his travel case. These tools had been with him for 15 years. They knew his hands. They had fixed 1,000 small things, solved 1,000 minor problems, brought joy to people who just needed something repaired. He picked up the only photo in his shop. 300 faces stared back at him. Falcon Unit before the breach. Before Kandara. Before everything went wrong. His fingers traced familiar features. Friends who never got to grow old. Brothers and sisters who died believing they were doing the right thing. "I'm moving forward," he whispered to them. "Like you would have wanted. Not backward into what we were. Forward into what we should have been." Through the window, Lyra waved at him from the corridor outside, her robot perched happily on her shoulder. Daniel waved back, smiling. The galaxy would learn what humanity really meant. Not just how they fought when cornered. Not just how they held impossible lines and made impossible sacrifices. They would learn how humans built. How they taught. How they fixed broken things and made them whole again. How they turned survivors into teachers instead of weapons. How they chose to move forward instead of staying trapped in the past. Falcon Unit's legacy wouldn't be written in fire and blood and sacrifice. It would be written in every child's toy that worked perfectly. Every reactor that ran safely. Every station that stayed pressurized. Every small repair that mattered to someone. Every student who learned to build instead of destroy. Every small thing that made life just a little bit better. Daniel locked his shop door one final time. The sign still read Baker's Repairs in 3 faded languages. Maybe someone else would open a shop here. Maybe it would stay empty. Either way, his time here was done. He headed for the docks, his tool case in hand, his past on his arm, his future waiting aboard an Admiral's ship. The work was just beginning. And this time he would get it right.